Albert stood at the window, watching the rain pour down in relentless sheets. Each drop sounded like a drumbeat against the roof, amplifying the silence inside his small, cluttered apartment. He took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, his mind wandering back to the events of the day. It had been uneventful, much like the rest of his days, since moving to this isolated town. He had come here for the peace and quiet, to escape the chaos of the city, but tonight the solitude felt suffocating. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the monotony. It was a message from an unknown number. "Are you alone tonight?" Albert frowned, his fingers hovering over the screen. He considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of him. "Who is this?" He typed back. The reply came almost immediately. "Someone who knows what you did." A chill ran down his spine. He glanced around the dimly lit room, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. He hadn't told anyone about what happened last summer. Not a soul knew. His heart pounded as he typed back, "What do you want?" "Meet me at the old warehouse by the docks. Midnight. Come alone." Albert's mind raced. The old warehouse was abandoned, a relic from the town's industrial past. He had passed by it many times but never paid much attention. Now it seemed like the setting for a nightmare. He knew he should ignore the message, but something compelled him to go. Maybe it was the need to confront his past, to put an end to the fear that had been gnawing at him. As the clock struck midnight, Albert found himself walking through the rain-soaked streets, his footsteps echoing in the empty night. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusty exterior illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. He hesitated at the entrance, his breath visible in the cold night air. Inside, the darkness was almost complete, save for a few shafts of moonlight filtering through broken windows. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. The sound of dripping water echoed through the vast space, creating an eerie soundtrack to his apprehension. "Hello," he called out, his voice barely a whisper. There was no response. He took a few more steps, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Albert's heart skipped a beat. "You're late," the figure said. It was a woman, her face obscured by the hood of her raincoat. "Who are you?" Albert demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Someone who knows," she replied cryptically. She pulled out a flashlight and shone it on Albert's face, making him squint. "Knows what?" he asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "What you did last summer," she said, her voice cutting through the darkness. "It's time to pay for your sins." Albert's mind raced, flashes of that night coming back to him. The rain, the slippery road, the figure that had appeared out of nowhere. He had driven away, panicked, telling himself it was an accident, that no one would ever know, but someone did. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman stepped closer, lowering the flashlight. Her face came into view, and Albert recognized her. She was the sister of the man he had hit. "I want justice," she said, her eyes burning with anger and sorrow. "You left him to die." "I didn't know what to do," Albert stammered. "I was scared." "You should have called for help," she retorted. "Instead, you ran. Now it's time to face the consequences." Albert's mind scrambled for a way out. "I'm sorry," he pleaded. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Sorry won't bring my brother back," she replied coldly. "You're going to turn yourself in. Tonight." Albert felt trapped. He knew she was right, but the thought of prison terrified him. "And if I refuse?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small voice recorder. "I have a recording of our conversation," she said. "If you don't go to the police, I'll make sure everyone in this town hears it." Albert's shoulders sagged in defeat. He knew there was no way out. "Fine," he said, his voice hollow. "I'll do it." She nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I'll give you until morning. If you're not at the police station by then, I'll release the recording." "You have my word." Albert walked back to his apartment in a daze, the rain masking his tears. He spent the rest of the night staring at the wall, the weight of his guilt and fear pressing down on him. When the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, he knew what he had to do. He made his way to the police station, each step heavier than the last. The woman was waiting outside, her eyes following him as he approached. He paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. This was it, the end of his freedom, but maybe the start of atonement. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. "I need to make a confession," he said to the officer at the desk. As he spoke, he felt a strange sense of relief. The burden of the secret was finally lifted, even as the future remained uncertain. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the sins of the past, one drop at a time. Connor had always found solace in the sound of rain, the rhythmic pattering on the roof, the way the droplets clung to the windows. It all brought a certain calm to his otherwise tumultuous life. But this night was different. The rain fell in heavy sheets, almost oppressive, as if the heavens were trying to wash away something more than just the grime of the city. Connor had just finished his shift at the old bookshop, a small haven nestled in a forgotten corner of town. The place was a relic, much like Connor himself felt sometimes, out of place in time. The shop was a refuge for those seeking obscure knowledge or a quiet escape. Tonight, however, even the comfort of the musty tomes and worn leather chairs couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. As he locked up and stepped into the night, the rain hit him like a cold slap. He pulled his coat tighter, the collar turned up against the wind. The streets were nearly deserted, the usual hum of traffic reduced to the occasional splash of a passing car. Connor's apartment was only a few blocks away, but tonight the walk seemed longer, the shadows darker. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every so often, he'd glance over his shoulder, only to see empty streets and darkened windows. It was absurd, he told himself, just the rain playing tricks on his mind. As he reached his building, an old Victorian converted into a series of small flats, he fumbled with his keys, hands trembling slightly. The lock finally gave way, and he stepped into the dimly lit foyer. The usual creaks and groans of the old building seemed amplified tonight, each sound sending a jolt of anxiety through him. He climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment, the narrow hallway feeling more claustrophobic than ever. As he reached his door, he noticed something odd, a small, damp envelope wedged under the doorframe. Connor picked it up, his name scrawled across the front in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, there was a single piece of paper, the ink slightly smudged from the moisture. The message was brief, and it sent a chill down his spine. "You're not alone. Watch the window." Connor's heart pounded as he looked around, the wall seeming to close in. Who could have left this, and why? He walked to the window, the rain still lashing against the glass. For a moment, he saw nothing but his own reflection. Then, in a flash of lightning, he saw it, a figure standing across the street, half hidden in the shadows. His breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching. Connor's mind braced. Should he call the police? Confront whoever it was? As he debated, another flash illuminated the street, and the figure was gone. Connor stepped back from the window, the letter still clutched in his hand. He felt exposed, vulnerable. The comfort of his apartment now felt like a cage. He needed to know what was going on, who was watching him, and why. Determined to find answers, Connor decided to investigate. He grabbed his flashlight and ventured back into the rain-soaked night. He retraced his steps to the spot where the figure had stood, scanning the ground for any clues. The rain made it difficult, washing away any potential evidence. As he stood there, he noticed something unusual, a small muddy footprint leading into a nearby alley. He hesitated. The darkness of the alleyway seemed to swallow the light from his flashlight. But he couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the alley, each step echoing off the narrow walls. The alley twisted and turned, leading deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the city. Connor followed the footprints until they abruptly stopped in front of an old abandoned building. The door was slightly ajar, the wood swollen and warped from the rain. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of damp and decay. Connor's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As he moved deeper into the building, he felt a growing sense of dread. He called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. No response. Just as he was about to turn back, he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. He strained to hear, following the sound to a small room at the end of the hall. The door was closed, but the whispering continued, a chorus of hushed voices that sent chills down his spine. Connor pushed the door open, and the whispering stopped abruptly. The room was empty, save for a single chair in the center. On the chair was another envelope, identical to the one he had found at his apartment. Hands shaking, he picked it up and opened it. The message inside was even more unsettling. "You're getting closer. Don't stop now." Connor's mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The urge to turn back was strong, but curiosity and a strange sense of duty compelled him forward. He had to know who was behind this, why they were targeting him. He exited the small room and continued to explore the building. Every creak of the floorboards and every drip of water echoed ominously in the empty space. The oppressive darkness seemed to press in on him from all sides, his flashlight the only beacon in the gloom. As he rounded a corner, he stumbled upon a staircase leading to the basement. The stairs descended into a pitch-black void, the faint sound of dripping water echoing up from below. He hesitated, peering into the darkness, before steeling himself and starting down the steps. The basement was even colder than the upper floors, the air damp and heavy. His flashlight flickered again, casting eerie, wavering shadows on the walls. Connor's footsteps were muffled by the wet, uneven ground as he ventured deeper into the subterranean space. In the far corner of the basement, he saw a faint light emanating from a crack under a door. The sight sent a chill down his spine, but he pressed on, each step feeling like it took an eternity. He reached the door and carefully pushed it open. The room beyond was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust and cobwebs. In the center of the room was a small table with a single, dim light bulb hanging above it. On the table was a stack of photographs. Connor approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He picked up the top photograph and felt a cold wave of shock wash over him. It was a picture of him, taken from a distance, as he locked up the bookshop earlier that night. The next photo was of him walking home, then another of him entering his apartment building. Someone had been following him, documenting his every move. He rifled through the rest of the photos, each one more disturbing than the last. There were pictures of him in various places around the city, some from months ago. Whoever was behind this had been watching him for a long time. Among the photos was another envelope. Connor opened it with trembling hands, the message inside simple and chilling. "You can't hide." Suddenly, the light bulb flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Connor's flashlight sputtered, its beam growing weaker by the second. Panic set in as he backed away from the table, feeling his way along the wall to the door. He stumbled into the hallway, his flashlight barely illuminating the path ahead. He needed to get out, to find help. But as he made his way back through the basement, he realized something terrifying. The exit was no longer there. The walls seemed to have shifted, the layout of the basement changing like a living maze. Desperation clawed at him as he searched for a way out, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The whispering started again, faint at first, then growing louder, filling his ears with a cacophony of voices. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a maddening chorus that threatened to overwhelm him. Connor stumbled through the darkness, his mind racing. He couldn't understand what was happening. Had he somehow triggered a trap? Was he being toyed with by whoever had been watching him? The questions swirled in his mind, no answers forthcoming. Just when he thought he would succumb to the chaos, he saw a faint light ahead. Summoning the last of his strength, he moved toward it, hoping it was an exit. As he neared the light, he realized it was another door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, with a single chair in the center and a video camera on a tripod facing it. The walls were lined with monitors, each one showing a different view of the city. Connor's apartment, the bookshop, various streets he frequented. They were all there, live feeds capturing every moment. On the chair was yet another envelope. Dread filled him as he opened it, the message inside cryptic and final. "We've been waiting." Connor barely had time to process the words before the door slammed shut behind him, the locks clicking into place. The monitors flickered, the images shifting to show the basement he had just escaped. The whispering returned, louder now, filling the room with its insidious presence. Trapped and alone, Connor realized the horrifying truth. He was the center of a twisted game, a pawn in someone's elaborate scheme, and there was no way out. The rain continued to fall outside, indifferent to his plight, as the whispers closed in.